Hi, welcome to Better and Better Psychology podcast. I am your host, psychotherapist M. Gary Neuman, with my wise psychotherapist daughter co-host, Esther Neuman. We have a very meaningful, heartfelt guest on today, Professor Freyd. She developed the term DARVO, and she's going to talk to us all about narcissism and overcoming victimhood. Anyway, we're going to get to her real quick. We're very excited to have her.
So
She's a remarkable individual. We feel blessed to have her. Esther, what have you been thinking about?
So I know we like to start off, with a little thought. So I was thinking, as we start talking about DARVO and kind of had, negative things in our lives and how we protect ourselves. I was thinking, I heard a thought that people who give kindness and who do acts of kindness release all sorts of oxytocin and feel-good hormones. And then not only do the person giving kindness, but the person receiving that kindness, and then the person who's watching a kind act
Really?
also gets these feel-good oxytocin hormones. So I was thinking, with all the, we have a lot of negativity in our lives sometimes, and, we just kind of think, kindness wins out. Goodness wins out. Just bringing more kindness and giving more in your lives will really, I think, uplift you and help you onto a great path, no matter what. So
I love that. That's wonderful. And that's great. That's like our ending for all the being in the trenches we're going to go into today.
Let's go. On that note.
Jennifer Joy Freyd has a PhD. She's an influential researcher, author, activist, and speaker. She is Professor Emerita of Psychology at the University of Oregon and founder and president of the Center for Institutional Courage. An internationally renowned scholar, Freyd is best known for her theories of betrayal trauma, institutional trauma, and DARVO, which we'll discuss today. Dr. Freyd has received many national and international awards, including most recently, 2024, the Gold Medal Award for Impact in Psychology from the American Psychological Foundation. Not too many people can say that, let me tell you. So very impressed. We're very happy. Well, Doctor, thank you for taking the time to be with us. Welcome to Better and Better Psychology.
Thank you for having me.
So I just want to get started and with DARVO. You really, I think you mean a lot to people like us therapists who are trying to help others. And, for me, the experience, and also in my own personal life, dealing with people and seeing the world events, is to give the phrase, to give the explanation, because much of what goes on when we're betrayed or when we are victimized is we scratch our head and we wonder, like, what's going on? How can it continue? And why doesn't everybody see it? And it's really the DARVO acronym and the concept that you've brought about that at least says, like, you're not alone. This is going on all the time, and you have to recognize that it is some real thing that happens, and it just gives us all a little peace and calm. I'd like to talk to you more about how to deal with it, of course. But do you want to quickly tell us what DARVO means?
Yeah, DARVO is an acronym, and it stands for D, deny, A, attack, RVO is reverse victim and offender, and it refers to a tactic that people can use when they are trying to avoid being accountable when somebody is asking them to be accountable. So if a victim of an interpersonal trauma, say, of some sort, approaches the perpetrator and tells them what happened, how it was from their perspective, the perpetrator can respond with this deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. And it is very effective especially for people who don't know about it. It can really confuse the person who's being targeted in that way. And it can also confuse observers who are watching the interaction. And we know this because we've done research on DARVO. We've collected data, and we know quite a bit now about how it impacts the victim, how it impacts observers, as well as we're beginning to learn some things about who is most inclined to use this tactic.
who is most inclined? Is it, I know narcissist is a big phrase now, but is it mostly people of that ilk or that nature that will use this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you know in psychology research, when we look at individual differences, like what kind of people, you know, jump off bridges or whatever it is, it's not going to be a one-to-one. It's probabilistic. So what we're looking at is correlations. And we can measure people's tendency to use DARVO as well as measure other things about people. And we have found some rather striking, I would say, correlations for psychology. Over zero point 0.5, which is unusual in some cases, over zero point 0.6. Between the variables that have really stood out to us are some behavioral variables, including the propensity to be a sexual harasser. That is, people who have more tendency to sexual harass are also more likely to resort to DARVO. Another strong correlation is with what we call rate myth endorsement. That's people who will say they agree with statements that are rate myths, such as, you know, if she didn't want it, she would have fought back harder or whatever. The In a way, you know, a particularly interesting set of correlations is with personality variables. And what we've measured are 3 variables that are part of what are known as the dark triad. So that includes psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. And in each of the cases, the correlations are quite strong, around 0.6 in that range. So that means that if somebody is a regular DARVO user, they have a good chance of also having narcissistic personality features. And I should say these weren't clinical diagnoses we were measuring. These were personality features. But there are, of course, going to be some people who use DARVO that are not high in narcissism. And the reverse is true. I think of this as a red flag. If somebody uses DARVO, it's a red flag to a bunch of other things, but it's not proof.
Right.
Yeah, that was go.
Yeah, no. So the DARVO concept to me is so everybody understands that there's basically it can be in all parts of severity, but it's basically somebody is attacking, somebody is aggressive, but then somehow they are reversing and they're always playing the victim and somehow saying either I didn't do this and you're mistaken and you've done this same thing to me, or I have done it, but it's deserving because you've done something to me. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And although you can use the 3 parts separately, they do hang together. So this is another thing we've researched, that when somebody encounters a denial, they're more likely to then encounter this attack on their credibility. I should say the A attack is can take various forms, but it's most often an attack on credibility. So you say to the person, oh, you know, you're just doing this because you want attention, or there's something wrong with your memory, or you were drunk, or whatever you can say to make the person seem less credible. And then the RVO, the reverse victim and offender, that's the most insidious part. And it can be quite subtle, but it also can be pretty overt. That the perpetrator can say, you are ruining my reputation. I'm the victim in this situation.
Right.
And really cast the person who's brought the issue up as the offender in the situation. I mean, and you're right, it can take lots of different forms.
Well, I think that's my point. My point is, okay, to the extreme, terrorism. I think a lot of terrorists are, you see that they're killing, and yet somehow they're the victim. But then I see people, a guy cheats, and like in our office, say, she went through my phone. She went through my phone. She's coming. It's like, you're cheating, and your problem is now you're the victim because she doesn't give you privacy. It's like, it's mind-boggling. We find a lot in the court system, fascinating how in divorce court, because we deal with divorce a lot also, how one person is narcissistic and is just pounding away and using the court as a weapon. And the judge, the lawyers, it's all the PR that somehow the usually as a therapist, you can see this poor person is just being dragged around and beaten up. And then, but the powers that be, I know you have a whole government idea about betrayal, can't see it. And they figure, well, if they keep saying it, it must be true. You know, I mean, come on, even though the evidence seems so clear to me and a few around. So it goes across all places in life, I think, is what I'm trying to help people understand.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think the adversarial judicial system often really pulls for it. I mean, the way defense attorneys in, say, a criminal case or a civil case even will try to defend often uses DARVO very explicitly.
Right.
And it's really can be really, really terrible to plaintiffs, victims in the court system because they they can get demolished. And if people don't help them understand and prepare them that this is going to happen to you, it's even worse. So yeah, I think that the judicial system is a hotbed of DARVO.
Yeah. I almost even, within civil cases also, I even, I think now it's always like, just avoid it. Like it's almost feels like you can't win against people who are this manipulative, and it's just too much, which is why you often have in these situations a really good person and a devilish person. And the good person just finally like runs out of steam, keep the money, whatever, take the kids. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? It's like
we've seen that.
We've seen this, and it's unbelievable. Go ahead.
And to your point, I think you mentioned a point where the people using DARVO, whether in family court or interpersonal, the people on the outside sort of believe it because it looks like reasonable. I mean, we've seen crazy cases of like abuse, and it's like, nah, the abuser, but and somehow the system and the people looking on seem to believe it. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of remarkable, but we see it, it's on national TV. We see it work. And, what politicians, celebrities, they do it and get away with it. And so more and more people then think, oh, this is a way to deflect blame. And whether they're consciously thinking that or they're just modeling their behavior on what they see. So part of it is just this repeated exposure to it works. The research we've done on how to interrupt that does it suggest that if people are educated about DARVO, they know the term, they know how to see it and identify it, they know to expect it when they go into certain encounters, they are less susceptible to it, both as targets and as observers. So that's the good news. That probably this technique really depends on a certain amount of unawareness and ignorance on the part of the people who are experiencing it and observing it. Yeah.
So my big question, the person who's doing the DARVO, okay, and I've had this discussion with so many people, do they know it? Do they believe their own stuff or not? And it may not be a simple yes or no, but what are your thoughts?
You're
you know better than anybody.
I'm sure the answer is that yes and yes, right? I mean, both things happen. And one of the things that's so interesting about people is how they can convince themselves of a new reality. Right. And so if somebody has done something horrible, but they keep denying it, and especially if there is, in some sense, no way to absolutely prove it. So something occurs, between two people, no observers were there, and they know that nobody can for sure prove it. That can get turned into, in their own mind, into, therefore, I'm innocent. It's a jump of logic. But if you can't prove it, then I didn't do it. And even though, in fact, they did it, but because it can't be proven, it somehow therefore didn't happen. So there is that can occur, that just repeating that DARVO response, it's like a self-righteousness people can develop where they actually start to believe they're in the right. Well, I think some people use it very consciously, like on purpose, and some people get coached to use it. I mean, it has all kinds. And then there's one other that maybe you had in mind too, one other version where people did something and for some reason don't realize they did it. I mean, a lot of people can be unaware of how they've harmed somebody else and they respond very defensively. And I mean, I think we've probably all had that experience, right?
Yes.
Somebody comes up to you and says, you know, you really hurt my feelings when you did XYZ, and you're sitting there feeling kind of wrongfully accused because you don't feel you've done anything bad. It can take some real self-reflection to realize, oh, wait, they probably had a point there. I was probably being oblivious and I did this thing. But if you don't self-reflect and you just have this, immediate DARVO response, then you could just be, again, living in this reality of innocence when actually you're guilty.
Right. And you can start blaming them. People do that, right?
I think also because the lawyers and within the systemic, they're all using DARVO, right?
Right.
The entire system.
Adversarial, like
they're all
said,
adversarial.
set
So
up that way.
you have an, sort of innocent type person coming in and they're being attacked from all ends, from everywhere. And they can't get out of it. Even, I've seen even the people's own attorneys do it to them.
Right.
So, and if you have someone who has been a victim or has been in an abusive relationship, they really get caught up in that because it's just more abuse and more of what they're used to. So,
what about the people, the observers? Do you have any sense of which observers go along with the DARVO and which do not? Because that's also a big split. Like the average person, one person like scratches their head and says, what are you talking about? You're obviously the aggressor. And then the other person thinks, well, yeah, I get it. She's the victim, Is there any sense of what kind of person is taken in by the DARVO objective?
That really should be researched. We have not yet conducted that research. The only thing we know is that what I mentioned, that if we educate people, and we've done this experimentally where we compare random, some people randomly sign to be educated about DARVO, some not, and then looking at their susceptibility. So that we know. But there are a lot of other ways people differ. And, it'd be really interesting to look at. I mean, one of the things I want to look at right away is people's gender, because we know women are more likely to be the recipients of DARVO. And if you've had this experience coming at you, you might be more likely to have some understanding that it's not fair. But I don't know. That's just a guess. Okay. Other kinds of power, though, because people who have great power might be the most blind to it when it's being used in front of them.
So you're saying people in places of power, like, and unfortunately, judges, people who are in power, they would have less potentially vision of this. Why?
Yeah, that's my guess. Yeah, if they don't intellectually know about it, but they're just, operating based on their social status, I would think, but we have to do this study. I would think it's going to be harder for them to see through it.
Why is that? Why does the power do you think?
I mean, because it is such a stance of power to do it. And when we see it happening on TV and so on, and where it's really effective, it's very powerful people who are doing it, who have credibility, who are presumed to know what's going on. So if you see somebody DARVO and you are a person of power, it's going to look familiar to you, not because you've received DARVO, but because
you do it.
Maybe you've engaged in it, or your peers engage in it. It's going to look to you like, well, a thing that is sort of related. I get asked this question, and it's often by people who are quite privileged and powerful in our society. And the question is, well, if you're innocent, aren't you going to use DARVO? Like, of course, people deny it and respond in this way. And what I say is, no. I mean, you could. an innocent person could use DARVO, but they absolutely don't have to. And it's not at all a foregone conclusion they will. An innocent person can respond to, let's say, a false accusation. They can respond without DARVO, and they might have a kind of denial, but it's not usually the very aggressive denial. It's usually more, I don't think I did that. That's not how I understood what I remembered. I'm really confused. You're saying this, and oh my God, that kind of response. And they can also refrain from attacking the credibility of the person or doing the whole reverse victim and offender. And
Sure.
and in fact, the irony is, if a person does that sincerely, they probably will look innocent, because that's what an innocent person often does. Um, People with a whole lot of power in society who get away with DARVO may not even know how to respond well to an accusation, and may not
Right.
know what to recognize there. I mean, the other thing is, if you've been accused of something you actually did do, you can admit it and apologize, which,
Right.
and that's sort of like something, again, some people just have the hardest time doing.
Yes. Well, and I think nowadays also apologies are out the
Yeah.
window. Everyone's,
Yeah.
don't apologize, because it's interesting. I think when sometimes I apologize now, it used to be that settled things. Everything was calmer. Now it seems when I apologize, and I still do, I don't care, the person seems to feel like they come at me harder. Like, oh, you apologize. Like I really have you in a vulnerable lower position or something. It's not what it used to be, and I think society has somehow shifted this concept. I did want to mention one thing which I thought, just thoughtfully, when you say that the person who doesn't use DARVO, right, as an innocent person, I think most innocent people, they don't even think of DARVO. I mean, deny, okay, but to reverse, that's not something in common thinking for me or people like me or us, But when you do respond innocently, you are like, you don't come out so forcefully. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, maybe, I don't know. And there's always an I don't know, because you're an innocent person. You're trying to figure it out. If the other person, the DARVO person, they'll attack and they're clear and whatever. I think to you, the innocent person, and to the bystander, it says, well, this person's always on point. This person's always sure that they didn't do it and they're the victim. And this person's like, I don't know, kind of weak and wavering and whatever. Must be, I'll go with that person. I'm just always trying to figure out how it happens. I'm just piggybacking off of that idea. If like somehow psychologically that's the dynamic.
The person who wavers and kind of is thoughtful or a good person or innocent, they're the ones who don't seem like, oh, well, you don't know,
Right. So maybe you're not the truthful
Maybe
one.
you're not truthful, right? Because you have to think about it. Because you have to think about, there's this like misconception of, you think about something before you answer, like you're guilty because you're trying to think of the answer. So I think maybe, I don't know, is that?
No, you're right. I mean, that's why we find DARVO works, I think, in part. And when in one of the first findings, and I should say my primary collaborator on the research has been Sarah Harsey. In one of our earliest studies, we found that the person who receives the DARVO, so the one it's being delivered to, tends to blame themselves for whatever the issue was. Like it is really effective. But I just come back to, again, I mean, we can interrupt this with education.
Okay.
We can teach people so they know. I mean, part of the problem we're always facing in how victims are treated is ignorance, like the lack of understanding and knowledge of what it is to be a victim or a person of less power, how one would respond under different conditions. People are very, very uneducated, and that could change. We could educate people.
So to that point, let's say, I see a lot of people in relationships, and sadly, many of the women I work with have been with someone, they've had DARVO used, I think they say narcissist, I'm with this guy or that guy. And it's very hard to move forward. So when I try to help women identify, right, when they're early on in those relationships, because it's sometimes hard to see. So I think your point about, okay, someone could deny, maybe you're with someone and they deny, oh, I don't know if I did that, right? But when they go this step further, when you have that feeling, if the woman has the feeling like, oh, I feel bad, like I just said something, I just pointed something out and I'm feeling bad. Is that a sign that DARVO is being used? How do women identify that early on?
Yeah, I that's a good question. I think it could be a sign that DARVO is being used. Probably the best way to be sure is actually to, as soon as it's possible, write down the words. Write down the words that were said and analyze them and look for attacks on credibility. Look for over-the-top denials. Look for victim statements coming from the person, who's behaving that way, where they start to put themselves in that victim role. It's hard to catch those in the moment, but if you can go, run into the bathroom and scribble them on a piece of paper, you can come back to them and analyze them.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. So you write it down afterwards and you kind of look at how the progression. So if you're in a conversation with a decent human being and you say, hey, I don't like the way you did that. Typically, I find a nice person will be like, wow, I didn't mean to make you feel that way. I don't think I was wrong or whatnot. But then it kind of ends there. Like, how do we make things better? Or maybe a resolution. But if it goes further and you're writing down like, no, I can't believe you did that to me, right? And that person becomes the victim. That's when we want to really pay attention that they're making themselves the victim.
Right.
Okay.
An over denial.
An over denial. Right. Okay.
I
think that's another thing you said, which I didn't think about.
No, that's a very good point. So an over denial.
Yeah. Also, it might tip the scales, tell you that something.
Right. Like I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't know what you're talking about. There was nothing.
Or in a big way. I think sometimes, because I know with people who cheat, it's like when they're accused, it's like their denial is aggressive, in their denial.
Okay.
So I think it's always like in your gut. If it doesn't feel normal and nice, then something's up. I think that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
In your gut. Yeah. Tell us about institutional betrayal. I mean, maybe we've touched upon it already,
Yeah, and let me go back to the concept that I worked with before that. It makes it easier to explain, which is betrayal trauma. And betrayal trauma, which is so relevant to a lot of these scenarios we've been discussing, is when somebody, when a victim is of some kind of trauma, some kind of interpersonal trauma, is very close to trust and in some kind of dependent relationship with the perpetrator. So a child and a parent, or a child and a coach or teacher, or in many relationships where there's a big power asymmetry between the members of the couple. And when there's been a mistreatment, that victim is in a particular kind of bind because they need the relationship or believe they need the relationship for their very survival. And clearly, if it's a young child with a parent, that's objectively very true.
Sure.
Even for adults, it could be true depending on the economic asymmetry or other things going on, or they just feel it. I mean, even if they're wrong, objectively wrong, they still feel that sense of dependence. And in that situation, if the person who's being victimized is fully aware of what's going on, they will have a reaction that we as humans have to betrayal, because it is a betrayal. If somebody who's supposed to have your back, who's supposed to be taking care of you, does something terrible to you, that's a betrayal. And the way we respond to betrayal in lots of situations in life when we're really empowered is a very strong negative reaction. It is one of the most uncomfortable, bad feelings to feel you've just been cheated, you've just been betrayed. And it motivates behavior. The behavior it motivates is to confront or to withdraw. So you either basically start a fight and say, you've just done this terrible thing. You cheated on me. You stole my money, whatever it is, you confront, and or you run away from the relationship. like you just leave. Like, I'm not going to be, part of this situation anymore because look what happens to me here. Those two behaviors, confront or withdrawal, are not an option for a really dependent person. What are they going to do? What's a,
Right.
what's an
5-year-old
abused 2-year-old
yeah,
going to
right,
do?
exactly. No, they're not leaving.
So, yeah, they're not leaving. And if they withdraw or confront within the relationship, they are just going to make their situation worse.
Right.
Yeah, because we're born with this really powerful attachment system that ensures that the dependent baby does the cute little things to motivate parental caregiving, which is very resource intensive. And that all those behaviors are approach and engagement behaviors. They're not confrontation withdrawal. They're the opposite. And the dependent person needs to keep doing those things to keep the relationship working. So it's this total bind between the response that would protect you from more betrayal, that withdrawal or confrontation, and this other, even often more important thing, which is the response that keeps the relationship going, because you need that relationship.
So what does the
So-
person in that situation where they're so-called stuck or
Yeah.
feel stuck, how does this feelings of betrayal how are they even worse?
Yeah. Well, so what they do is what I call betrayal blindness.
Mhm.
They don't see the betrayal,
Right.
or they
Ah.
don't. I mean, there's different ways. Like sometimes people just really don't see it. Like they don't. It's like their unawareness is mind-boggling. Other times they might sort of see the facts, but they turn it around in their head to somehow it's their fault, or they twist it.
Well, children
so
do
that
that
they
a
don't
lot.
have to feel betrayed. And so they can keep in that relationship. And so betrayal blindness, we find, is really powerful. It affects memory, and it has a survival advantage for people. It can keep them alive when they're dependent, but it, of course, has these big costs down. I mean, one cost is it's hard to stop the ongoing betrayal. It's hard to stop anything. It's hard to get help because you're not going to seek help. And then it can sort of go on for a lifetime, because people who've gotten really good at betrayal blindness then keep finding themselves in situations where they're being betrayed again.
Well
And
said, yeah.
they don't know why. Do I yet again have a boyfriend who's treating me this way, or whatever it is? So that's something we researched for a long time. We found out that there's a lot of mental health consequences and some physical health consequences to betrayal trauma,
And blindness.
and
To be realized, yeah.
blindness.
I think it's a remarkable space. It's genius because it just helps again identify. I think about children, right? For sure, children they often blame themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, we know
Right.
divorce, that's a
Automatically,
very
yeah.
common thing. Anything, and they can't. They feel stuck. And when you talk about adults thinking about their childhood, there are these lapses in memory. Sometimes you think they just want to forget things, but it's these kinds of things. They translate things differently. There are people sometimes, it's so prevalent that you'll sometimes be sitting at a dinner table. I'm not talking about a therapy session, a dinner table. And some guy will say, oh, yeah, oh, my father used to beat us, right?
Yeah.
And like everybody's looking like, no,
That's not
dude,
okay.
that's not the normal thing. Like, and he's laughing about because he's turned it into this family lore where they've taken abuse, I mean, in this dramatic example, and made it into something acceptable or fun and interesting about their family.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very common. People do that. They twist it around. It's a really powerful. And there was a case that was documented in a film, a very strange documentary, but it involved a woman whose husband had been arrested and found guilty for a number of different kinds of sex crimes against children. But in his living room, on the coffee table, were piles of child pornography magazines. And his wife later said she did not see them. They lived in the same house.
Wow.
They were on the coffee table.
Yeah.
She did not see them.
Yeah.
And that's why I use the word blindness, because she actually was so good at this. She could just not see what was on the table in front of her.
Right. I worked with for many years with women and children domestic violence, and I would see it. They were actually institutional trauma, they would, if at the time, many years ago, if a child witnessed a domestic violence scenario and the police were called, they would remove the child from both parents in order to push the mom. The mom would have to come to me for therapy to push the mom to leave him. And it was, I mean, the re-traumatization of everything was awful. But I remember sitting with a lot of these women, and even now, even when I, in my practice, when I'm even, again, domestic violence can take many forms, emotional violence as well. It is a very hard thing helping women see that, okay, what he's doing to you now is exactly what happened to you as a kid, and you're not seeing it. And I think, to your point, it's a brilliant point, because we kind of, people want to live within the same trauma, or they're just used to it and they're blind to it and they can't give up that. Have you seen it, people be able to give that up, to get past the blindness, to have a better life? Is there a good, statistic on that? Is there hope?
Good vision.
Yeah, no, there's definitely hope. And I think part of what people have to do actually is to forgive themselves for the blindness, because it's when people do start to see it, they get into a battle with themselves, because, it seems like, what was wrong with me? What a horrible person that I, let this go on, I didn't stop it. And so, one of the things I always remind people is that the attachment system is very basic to us, and we are designed this way. And it's was a survival skill. So it's, beating yourself up for having gotten through a situation that was involving somebody else harming you, that you actually, should get congratulated. You stayed alive, you got through it, and now you're going to get out. And yeah, I mean, people, this because this is your profession. People can heal. It's an amazing thing about human beings, that people can, and it's hard work. That doesn't happen in an instant, but people really can, and can develop relationships where they learn how to detect betrayal and protect themselves. And, it's all totally fixable with work.
Yeah, this is beautiful. It's going to help a lot of people, to hear your voice and understand how to create that process of change, and we've
and I should just say, when it comes to institutional betrayal, the perpetrator of the harm is something bigger than an individual. It can be a family, which we often in our research call family betrayal. But it can be the church you attend. It can be a school. It can be a hospital. It can be the government. And in those cases, the institution can betray, and they can betray by really overtly, or there's a very common pattern with institutional betrayal, which is a failure to protect. So if you think about like campus sexual assault, which has gotten so much news over the years, a very common scenario is a student gets sexually assaulted by another student, and that's bad. And there's going to be mental health consequences.
Sure.
But then it gets so much worse when they try to get some help from the school.
Right.
And they get a bad response from the school. And there's all sorts of bad responses they're likely to get. The school may blame them, may cover it up, may find ways really actually to punish them. That's very common in some the military, for instance, been very common, of punishing the person who brings the allegation to the attention of the authorities. And what our research has found on institutional betrayal is it is really associated with harm for the survivor over and above the interpersonal.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it's a case where it's another case where I feel like this is something we can fix, because institutions can do better. It's much harder to figure out, how do we fix all the American families with dysfunctional patterns? That's a hard one, right?
I would like to think that it does come down to individuals, though, because the head of the hospital, or the head of the in the government, whatever, it does come down to, I want us to all feel that we can take your words and your life's work, and as individuals, we can make differences, because we're all in systems. So I can change my family. I can change my school class or school if I'm at a higher level. I mean, I can motivate people to make those changes and really give victims what they need to survive and to heal.
Yeah. There's more,
Yeah, no,
more space for it.
institutions are made of groups of people. The thing that makes it a little complicated with institutions is that certain patterns develop, like a culture in an institution that's
Sure.
not even dependent on any one person. And there can be
Yeah.
even well-meaning people inside institutions can be doing harmful things because that's how the institution is set up. That's the practice of the institution. So there's, in some ways, it makes it more complicated. In other ways, institutions are more fixable because they are contained. They have resources.
Right.
They're run by adults. I think one of the things that you're pointing out is if you have power in an institution,
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
then you're in a unique ability to
Right.
do good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. The good you can do for people with way less power in an institution, they still can make changes, but they almost always have to. There always has to be somebody who has enormous individual courage and can draw together a group of people to
Right.
take it on.
Right. No, it's very hard. I mean, as a matter of fact, usually, groups that have negative and angry culture, the people who are good, they just tend to leave them. They just get
Right.
beaten down and they leave them. I mean, let me just say, there's a reason why for 38 years I've been sitting in my own therapy office without barely any attachment.
Don't get on a board of anything. You're just staying.
So what can I tell
Doing
you?
good through this.
But I tried one time, but it didn't work. But that's another story. But anyway.
Well, it's hard. It's hard to, within institutions, within pieces, if there's something negative, and the culture is negative and you have someone good come in and try to, do some good. I mean, we have it in family systems, like you were saying, the American family being, different family or families having dysfunction. And it's hard, I find, when I'm working with, let's say adults who are realizing that their family, there's something going on, they then try to go in and fix their family. And it's a very hard.
They don't want to be fixed.
And they don't want to be fixed. And that's a whole nother, layer. And I think to your point about blame, when people stop blame, I thought it was a very good point because I think people do blame, well, I can't fix my family. I realize this, but now I can't even fix them. And that becomes a whole cycle in and of itself.
Right. So to mention what you were saying, to forgive yourself for, what happened,
Right.
because you take the blame and then you're upset with yourself that they took the blame. I didn't change it. I mean, obviously sexual victims as children, that happens a lot. Like I didn't stop it. I didn't this, I didn't, they get in their heads. And then by the time they're adults, they're so embarrassed because they're not thinking of it like that person's a criminal, should be in jail for the rest of their life. You know what I mean? Like it's had nothing to do with me, but they were so convinced so that they've done something. So to your point, a process therapeutically is to help that person forgive him or herself for what they wrongly believed about their past. Is that right?
Yes, I think another part of it is to forgive themselves for having loved or maybe even still loving the perpetrator.
Also.
And that can be true both for an individual and an institution. And people need to accept that they're wired to love. That's it's a good thing to love. And we come to this earth with this ability to love, and we are likely to love anyone who's giving us good things.
We're taken in easily because we want to love. We're taken in pretty easily.
But it's not a bad thing about
us.
It's not a bad
It's
thing.
good about us that we want to love and be loved.
And I think not all, but probably most survivors of childhood abuse still love their parents. They might not want to talk to them. They might be angry, but there's still usually some love because that's how it is. And it doesn't do any good to get into a big fight with oneself about that. And I think like giving people the message, it's okay. And you need to protect yourself. That's the important thing.
Right.
Protect. And what do you think is the best way? I know it's a big question, but the best way to protect, one can protect themselves against institutions, people with these, you want to love, you want to trust, you want to be able to live your life and loving and trusting, being open. How do we protect ourselves from these kinds of interactions?
Yeah, it's hard if we're in some sense stuck in them. If you're in a employment situation and you don't really have a lot of options for a different employment situation and there's institutional betrayal going on, what can you do? Like, you could be unemployed or you could stay. And I think, there's a couple things. One is, awareness helps to understand what's going on and just, have that self-forgiveness and understanding. Another is, to the extent possible, try to change the system. And often people do benefit, not only can systems get fixed, but people's own mental health can benefit from taking action to try to fix things, and finding other people to work with them to make the world a better place. And, having to we all have to live in an imperfect world. So I don't think that there's any something that's going to make it all go away.
Right.
I mean, sometimes you can get out of the situation. Sometimes you can leave a toxic relationship or a toxic job.
It's important to sometimes you have to walk away.
You can walk away.
I remember I have somebody that I'm helping now, and she was so hurt because there was a clergy person who was talking about marriage, and how you should, almost making her feel bad and she did. She felt bad for being divorced when she was physically abused, and she finally, after who knows, way too many years, got out. She wanted to call that person and say, don't you know that, there are people who should get out, So, of course, I'm sure that person would mean that, but that wasn't their focus. But you get hurt in so many ways without even realizing where it could come from.
Institutional and it's individual, and it's very hard to leave. I think the awareness, and, sometimes I work with people who are, and we've spoken about this on different podcasts, where people are in toxic relationships, but they have to stay. They have to stay for the kids. They have to figure it out. If they leave, it'll be worse, and, the biggest thing I found with helping people like that is that awareness, being aware of DARVO, being aware of what they're doing, and sometimes being aware of their childhood. And that's sometimes empowering, even if someone has to stay in the situation. Like you're saying, you have to be in a negative working environment, but if you're aware of it and you can work through it, that's or leave.
I like to tell people that you're not stuck. Not children, obviously they are, but any adult. I say you're not stuck. You're making a choice. Now, if your choice is this situation is bad, but leaving the situation is worse, okay, then that's your choice. But at least I feel when a person thinks of it that way, it gives them more empowerment to maybe do something better within the situation or potentially leaving, rather than the feeling of being imprisoned.
Yeah.
Then it's not blindness.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
the point. It's not blindness. Yeah. Well, we got to go, Dr. Freyd. It's been amazing, and it's one of the. I'm so looking forward to it, and it's really been so helpful because, again, I think this is such a prevalent part of everything all of us deal with on some levels, large and small, and we just wanted to get the word out, and we'll continue to do so.
And thank you for all your work and everything. I guess to ask you, the last question, how did you get into this? This is
how
your
did
passion,
DARVO,
right? So how did that come about?
I mean, the answer is, not surprisingly, personal experience. I was a tenured but young professor studying cognitive psychology, memory, and perception when various events in my own family of origin came to light, and I needed to make sense of those. And then my attempts to do so led to more events. I learned about DARVO in part by the way I was treated. It was taking what I knew intellectually as a scholar, researcher, and combining it with my direct personal experience, as well as listening to other people. I really feel like as a researcher, the best tool I've ever had is listen to other people and listen.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for your work and for, using what you've gone through to help others so profoundly.
So meaningful.
Profoundly.
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. So if you want to get in touch, so Dr. Freyd, you want to tell us about your work, anything you want people to be aware of that's coming up, or some work that you've done that you want to highlight?
Well, I would love it if people knew about the Center for Institutional Courage. It's a nonprofit I formed 5 years ago, and I have a wonderful group of people working with me there, and it's research and education to teach the world basically about how to protect against and prevent DARVO and betrayal and institutional betrayal through acts of institutional courage. And so really hope people take a look at our website. We have a lot of resources there.
What is that website?
Newsletter.
We're going to put it up also.
Courage. Yeah, just the words institutional courage run together.org.
Okay, wonderful. Terrific.
Amazing.
All right. And then you can find out more about me at, is it at Gary Neuman?
At M. Gary Neuman.
At M. Gary Neuman. Thank you.
TikTok and Instagram.
And all the technology. Thank goodness.
And at Esther Neuman Therapist.
Fantastic. All right. We want to thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Freyd, and we look forward to coming back and seeing you. And just everybody keep working hard, recognizing DARVO, getting away from DARVO. If you're a DARVO person, stop it. And
please
get help, do something, and keep working at it. And just like we always say here, you'll just continue to get better
and better.
Thanks all.